Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. My name is John Feinstein. I will basically be the traffic cop for the next hour or so to introduce all of these distinguished people behind me to speak about Coach George Welsh. It is April, and yet it's a perfect day for football, isn't it? I think George may have had something to do with that. A perfect October day to play a college football game right down the road. You could take George Welsh way to get there. Before I begin to introduce our speakers, there are a few people who are here who should be introduced, who are not on stage. Carla Williams, the athletic director here at the University of Virginia. And no offense, Ms. Williams, but this person deserves a huge round of applause because he's the man who hired Tony Bennett as your basketball coach. That would be Craig Littlepage. Also the best committee chairman for the NCAA basketball committee ever, although that's a low bar, right, Paige? 2006. And also, I think George's greatest and last boss is represented here today, Ms. Sue Paterno. Thank you so much for being here. And now, to begin our program, I would like to introduce we have 3 videos for you today. This first one is a slideshow that commemorates many of the key moments or funny moments or enjoyable moments or poignant moments on George's life. So please give your attention to the video.
George Thomas Welsh, a native of Coaldale, Pennsylvania, an All-American quarterback at the Naval Academy and a legend at the University of Virginia. The midshipman followed up a standout career and third-place finish in the Heisman Trophy balloting in 1955 with 7 years of service in the Navy before embarking on a college coaching career that would lead him to Charlottesville. He returned to his alma mater, restoring the Naval Academy's football tradition with 55 wins and 3 bowl appearances in 9 seasons. Welsh took the reins of a Virginia program in 1982 that had won just a single game the season prior and had only 2 winning seasons in nearly 3 decades before his arrival. 3 seasons later, the Who's were bowling, defeating Purdue in the Peach Bowl, and the Cavaliers never looked back. The 1987 season started a streak of 7-win seasons that would span 13 years. In that time, Welsh led the Cavaliers to 2 ACC crowns, 11 bowl games, and a school record 10 wins in 1989. The historic 1990 season saw the Who's ascend to #1 in the nation, and the Cardiac Cavs of 1995 handed the Florida State Seminoles their first conference loss in a thrilling 33-28 victory. George Welsh retired in the year 2000 as the winningest coach in Virginia and ACC history. A 2004 inductee into the College Football Hall of Fame and a 2009 entrant to the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame, George Welsh and Virginia football will be forever linked. The architect of the rebuild, the captain of the comeback, the old salt, George Thomas Welsh. George.
A lot of numbers in there. Dave Kane, the voice of Virginia football and basketball, was going rather quickly there. But a couple of numbers that I think are worth noting. As he mentioned, Virginia had 2 winning seasons in 29 years before George Welsh got here in 1982. It had never played in a bowl game. It played in 12 bowl games under George. It had never won an ACC championship. It won 2 under George, and both years, even though they were tied for first place, technically they beat the team they tied with, Duke in 1989 and Florida State in 1995, that memorable game that broke Florida State's 300-game ACC winning streak. Actually, it was only 29, but it felt like 300 to everybody else in the league, I think. One thing I hate, before I start introducing the speakers, just one quick story. I hate writers who quote from their own stuff, but I'm going to do it anyway. The first time I met George Welsh, I was a 21-year-old night police reporter at the Washington Post. And I was sent to cover a Navy Connecticut football game because I was still moonlighting for sports, having been a summer intern there. And Tom Bates, who was Navy Sports Information Director at the time, was apoplectic at the idea that, as he said, George Solomon, the sports editor, was sending, quote, children to cover Navy football. And he said, this is really important. We're good. What the heck are you doing here? Well, I was there. And after the game, Navy won 30-0 because Tom was right. Navy was good. He introduced me to George. And he started explaining, kind of spluttering, about how this very young person had been sent to cover the game, thinking George would somehow be upset. And George finally looked at him, put his arm on my shoulder, and said, Tom, if the Washington Post saw fit to hire him, I think he can handle this. And that relaxed me completely, and probably only 4 of my 5 questions were stupid. And that was George. I mean, all these guys are going to tell you stories about how tough he was and how crusty he was, but he had a heart as big as this building. And that was one of the key reasons why he was such a great coach and such a great man. So, moving on as quickly as possible. Our first speakers, plural, this morning, are 3 pretty good football players whose names you might recognize: Franco Harris, Lydell Mitchell, Charlie Pittman. Gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, John. We are here today to celebrate the life of and our connection to George Welsh, a good man, and a great coach who touched a lot of people's lives here in this room. A number of us are from different schools, different places, but we have one thing in common, and that's the connection to George Welsh. And I am proud myself to be connected to George and be part of his legacy, as well as Lydell Mitchell and Charlie Pittman. George was our position coach at Penn State. From recruiting all 3 of us, coaching all 3 of us, and sending all 3 of us to the NFL. Changed everything for us. And it changed everything for me. And it prepared me for everything. Being from the Penn State stage of George's life, I am honored to be here with his players from the Naval Academy and the University of Virginia. I feel we all are one family, and thank George for bringing us together. In the fast ways of today, it's great to see that George's way lasted for decades, and I'm proud to be part of it and to have shared time with him. And being here, I heard that how special it was during these fast times that George would take the time to shake each player's hand before every game. And how special is that? Wow. And my best to the children of George, Kate, Duffy, Matt, Adam, and thank you for sharing your dad with us. He was a good man and a great coach. Thank you.
Good. Good morning. My experience with George is really this. I came from a little small town in New Jersey, about 5 streetlights. And George came in town one time to see me and on a recruiting trip. And so he came to the school and they said, well, you can go up to the pool room and that's where you can find Lydell. George came up to the pool room and sat down. I said, Coach, how are you? He says, I'm good. I said, why don't you sit there while I shoot pool? Then he says, are you hungry? So I said, well, I got a little time. Let's go down to the bowling alley and get a quick hamburger. I got to get back to shoot pool. So he'd walk back up to the pool room with me, and I start shooting again, and he would sit on the side and watch me. So finally he says, well, I got to go. I said, I'll see you later, Coach. You know? So we never talked about anything as far as recruiting goes. So finally he said, Joe, every time I go down there to see Lydell, he's in the pool room. He said, I tried to talk to him. He said, you need to go up and see him. So I thought George didn't talk, you know. And so, but we had a special bond, and we got inducted in the same year to the College Football Hall of Fame. All of a sudden, we became closer. We talked. We stayed in touch. And I think Jay and Sue, you can appreciate this story. We're playing in the Cotton Bowl in 1972, and George told me this story about Joe. He says, before the game, the night before the game, Joe called George over and said, George, I'm a little nervous. You know, no one gave us a chance to beat Texas. We ended up winning the game 30-6. But George says, Joe said, I would like for you to call the plays tomorrow in the game. Now, all the time we were in school, I thought that George called the plays. Joe called every single play. And George says, Joe asked him to take over, and George called a brilliant game. We're leading 30-6 with 3 minutes to go into the game.
And then tell them they did enough game that you weren't MVP.
Yeah, I was MVP of the game, of course. that's because of George, right? All those plays he gave me. But anyway, you got 3 minutes left in the game, and Joe goes up to George and says, I got this now. I'll call the plays. So really, he was a great guy. We got a chance to really bond once we got inducted into the Hall of Fame together. And so we really stayed in touch. So we certainly going to miss him. And to the family, you know, our condolences.
Good morning. Two tough acts to follow here. My recollections of Coach George Welsh. I grew up in the inner city of Baltimore, Maryland. I was shy, bashful, underexposed kid, and it was George Welsh's job to convince me to go to the hills of Pennsylvania, which is now Happy Valley, and play for a coach that no one ever heard of. I was in Joe Paterno's first class, and it was his job to get me there so we can begin to build the foundation. And to lead these two. But they didn't need much leading. They were very good on their own. So what happened is a decision that I've never lived to regret. The decision to allow George Welsh to enter my life, send me to the Penn State University, and there's lessons that I learned there that I could just never forget. And one of them is that mediocrity is self-inflicted, but greatness is self-imposed. And that's all that means is confidence. Have confidence in yourself, confidence in your ability, and with this confidence, you can conquer almost anything. And I learned those lessons there under George Welsh and Coach Paterno. The other lesson is most people believe football is about knocking people down. I happen to believe that football is more about lifting people up, lifting up your teammates, encouraging your teammates, inspiring your teammates. And I learned that under George Welsh and Joe Paterno. Thank you for having us here. Thank the family for lending us George Welsh. He had a major impact on our lives, and I'm happy and honored to be a part of this presentation. Thank you very much.
While these three were up talking, Bill Curry leaned over to me and said, "How's that for a backfield?" Still coaching, right, Bill? Now that we've heard from three of George's players at Penn State, I'd like to bring up someone from his coaching time at Navy. It is worth remembering, the video mentioned it briefly, George was Roger Staubach before Roger Staubach. In 1955, he finished third in the Heisman Trophy voting for Army's team named Desire, which won the Sugar Bowl in 1955, 54 season 1955, and won the Sugar Bowl and finished ranked 5th in the country. So he was a great player before he became a great coach. But when he took over at Navy, The Mids had fallen on very hard times after Staubach's Heisman Trophy winning season in 1963, when they'd gone 9-2. They had had 8 losing seasons in 9 years, and the one winning season was 5-4-1. Back came George Welsh, class of '56, and the rest is history. And now here to tell you something about how it became history is one of Navy's great place kickers of all time. He only held 19 records when he graduated, place kicking records, Bob Tatum.
Thank you, John, and I don't hold any of them now. I'm Bob Tate. I'm a lawyer now, but many years ago I was a place kicker at Navy, and then after that I was a GA, a graduate assistant for George at Navy, and then later when I was fortunate enough to get into law school here at UVA, I was a GA for George here at UVA. And I know, looking at me, you're probably thinking he's a defensive tackle or something like that, but no, I was a kicker. I've been a friend of George and his family for 40 years now. It's so great to have Kate and Duffy and Matt and Adam here. In fact, when we were in the locker room back in the late 70s, Adam was 7 or 8 years old, and some of the guys, it might have been some of the linemen, would tie him up, put him in a laundry bag, and suspend him from the ceiling of the locker room, and everybody would chant Houdini while he would skillfully escape. Hopefully you weren't too scarred from that, Adam, and you're a great sport and a great little brother to the Navy team. As a kicker, it's probably difficult to do this, but I've actually been thrown out of a practice by George. Apparently you're not supposed to learn to juggle footballs on the sidelines. A little bit about George's brilliant coaching career. We're hearing all about this, but of course he started at Penn State. And I think at Penn State is where he got his love for really plain football jerseys. Let me show you one. This is my Navy jersey. This is an actual game jersey. You know, it has no Navy on the front. It has no name on the back. I'm sure he got this love from Joe Paterno at Penn State, but very plain jersey. In fact, when my son started playing sports and I showed him this jersey, he was like, "Dad, you didn't even play." And well, I really didn't. I was a kicker. But Navy's jerseys have become a little better over the years. Navy on the front, and the Naval Academy Athletic Association also put Welsh on the back of this one, and so hopefully the family would like to keep this one here. So as John mentioned, in 1973, George came to Navy. Navy had had 8 losing seasons in 9 years. And imagine the recruiting pitch then. You know, the Vietnam War is winding down. You have really short hair when all the other guys had long hair. So the pitch was something like this, I think. You can come here. You probably won't be able to get a date because you have really short hair. You certainly won't be good enough to be drafted in the pros, but you might get drafted and go to Vietnam. So despite that, George had a 7-4 record in his 3rd year, I think. All-American Chet Moeller is here from that team. Chet RSVP'd late to come here. I'm sure that's the only reason I'm speaking. Chet Moeller should be up here. In that 7-4 year, in George's 3rd year, we beat some good teams: Army, Syracuse, Pitt, Miami, and even mighty Virginia that year. 2 years later, my senior year, we were 9-3. We beat BYU in the Holiday Bowl and were ranked 17th in the final poll in the country, which is an amazing feat. Think about the Navy teams back in those days. We might not have had a kid, besides Chet, that could make like the Notre Dame team or the Syracuse team or some of these teams we were playing, yet George was able to play with those teams and beat a lot of them. George left Navy as the winningest coach in Navy history, as he left Virginia later as the winningest coach in Virginia history. Some brief remembrances about George. A couple things, of course there are a million stories, but a couple things I think about are his attention to detail, his meticulous attention to detail, his brilliant football mind, and his command presence. A quick story about each of those. His attention to detail. George methodically organized his practices. All the real players here would know the horns would go off every 4 to 17 minutes, and you'd be sprinting to the next carefully organized drill to make you better as a player and to make our team better as a team. The practice was very detailed. He knew everything about all his players, but one story stuck out in my mind. As the kicker, I used to always like to stand next to George on the sideline, not because I might be needed, but because I like to hear what was going on. And we're playing Duke, and we're driving, and we get down to the 40-yard line and the 35-yard line, and it's 4th down, and it's raining, and it's messy, it's a muddy field, and George turns to me and goes, "Can you make this?" I go, "No, George, the wind's against me, it's rainy, it's muddy, I can't possibly make this." He goes, "Well, get in there, we can't possibly punt from here." So, of course, I missed it, and George knew everything about his team except his kicker's limited range. George's brilliant football mind. Some people would chide George in his Navy days for his conservative play calling. But I often thought, as I mentioned earlier, that we don't always have the best talent here, and here we are winning 7, 8, or 9 games a year, so George must be brilliant. Coming back after George retired, I would see him either sometimes at football games, and sometimes he joined me at basketball games. Our law firm has a box, and George would come over and join us sometimes, and everybody was thrilled to have him. And, he had this photographic memory, and so I would ask him about plays from 30 or 40 years ago, and George would know, like, the down and distance, the wind, what was going on next. And so I asked him, I told this to one of my friends from Virginia, and he said, "Well, ask George the 3 questions," and he texted me 3 questions to ask George. And I want to read this exchange just so you can see how George recalled things so many years later. My friend from Virginia said, "Ask George this question: How gratifying was it after giving up an 18-point lead in the 95 Peach Bowl to watch Demetrius Petey Allen break off the kickoff return for a touchdown in the win?" And here's George's response. We have it in a text. One of the most amazing things about that play was Terrence Wilkins' block on the edge to spring Petey. It was the first and only time Terrence ever blocked anyone. My apologies to Terrence if he's here. But it was one of the greatest blocks I'd ever seen. He knocked the guy off the field and into the bench area. That's George Welsh, classic George Welsh. Finally, George's command presence. George was not a big man, but you respected him. And even though he was a teddy bear later, some people might have even feared him. So we had a practice here at UVA when I was a GA back in 1988, and it was a bad practice. We go to a big room afterwards to have the team meeting. All the players, 100 folks are in there, and the coaches and even the GAs get to go in there. And I'm back against the back wall with my back pressed against the back. George walks up to the podium, adjusts his papers, and somebody coughs in the second row. George sternly looks up, can't quickly find the perpetrator, looks down, adjusts his papers again, and then as he gets ready to speak, somebody coughs again. And so at that point, George says, "The next person that coughs is out of here." And so I didn't feel like I needed to cough before that, but suddenly there was this tickle in my throat, and I was terrified that I was going to be coughing and thrown out of there. So George, when George speaks, you listen. He had tremendous command presence. And in conclusion, George was absolutely brilliant. He was a great and meticulous planner and game day coach. He had terrific command presence, but he was more than that to me. He was a friend. We often talked on the phone. We'd go to basketball and football games together. In his retirement, he'd ask about my family. I had 2 daughters go here to UVA, and he'd check on them and ask how they were doing. I'm truly going to miss George Welsh, and the Welsh family in UVA can always be so, so proud of George Welsh. Fair winds and following seas, George.
Thank you, Bob. We now start to move on to the Virginia era, and let me start quickly with a story. In 1977, when I was a college senior, I covered a Duke, Virginia game here in Charlottesville for the student newspaper at Duke. Duke was a power that year. They went 4-7. Back in those days, that was a good year for Duke. And I remember late in the game, sitting right across the aisle from Gene Corrigan, who, by the way, is doing much better. I spoke to his son, Boo, yesterday after his stroke back in November, and he's improving, and I'm sure Gene would have loved to have been here today. But Gene was the athletic director at the time, and I was sitting right across the aisle from him in the press box. And with 3 minutes to go in the game, Virginia was driving, and Gene was sitting there going, please score. Please, we need this touchdown. Please score. The score was 31-0. Virginia did score. The final was 31-7, Duke. That's what Virginia football was like. They went 1-9-1 that year. 4 years later, they were 1-10, which is when they decided to hire George Welsh. I have no idea to this day why he chose to leave the Naval Academy, given, as Bob pointed out, the great progress he had made there in 9 years. But he decided to take on arguably the toughest job in Division I college football at the time. And here's what happened from that point on.
It's a great deal of pleasure now to introduce to you Virginia's new football coach, George Welsh. George?
With that announcement, the University of Virginia got itself another football coach today. Except for one shining moment 2 years ago, Virginia has been a loser. George Welsh has been a winner. His renovation of the Naval Academy's football program has almost been a miracle.
I think when it was announced that George Welsh was coming, I was at his first press conference. Everybody was excited because it seemed as if Virginia had made a new commitment to football. A lot of people consider Virginia football as just a big party. Nobody took it very seriously until George Welsh came to town. At his press conference, he said, I think we can turn this into a top 25 program. And a lot of writers turned around and looked at each other kind of scoffing, saying, why do you believe that, George? And he said, why not?
When George decided to come to Virginia, was why Virginia? You know, being the Navy guy that he was, kind of righted the ship and just said, listen, go out and find the best football players you can. And if they're 6'2", they're smart, and they're tough, we'll have good leadership, and we'll win with them. We'll get the 6'6" guys later. And that's what we did.
My timing was very good. I got the opportunity to do the color commentary in his second year. I'm not sure if I'd have survived in the 70s. I've always struggled when you're getting beat badly with things to say. I would just get quieter and quieter, and during the 70s you probably wouldn't have heard anything from me. With Coach Welsh, you know, we were excited to have him, but couldn't have anticipated how special he was.
People really started believing this is the guy that can do it. People started coming to games, people started to buy in, and from there wasn't a whole lot of slowing down.
It was an outpouring of decades of frustration. And it was really heartwarming to see. It really is gratifying in a lot of ways.
It was some of the most exciting football you could hope to watch.
He put Virginia football on the map. I think the football gods smiled down on Charlottesville and said, enough suffering, you're the program that football forgot, and we're sending you a winner.
Bob Tata is not the only Naval Academy graduate on the podium today. Tom O'Brien, Navy class of '71, who became an assistant coach here under George at Virginia and was part of that rebirth that we just saw the video on, and who I should mention went on to torture his alma mater when he was the head coach at Boston College, part of the reason why he's also in the Boston College Hall of Fame. But here now to talk about his days working with and for George Welsh, please welcome Tom O'Brien.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. What I'd like to do first off is, will all the former players or coaches that worked with George Welsh, wherever he's been, please stand. Now, please stay standing. I'd like the Welsh family to stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Come up here. Turn around and take a look. When I talk many times about leadership, one of the fellow Naval Academy graduates that I talk about is a guy named Doug Zembiak, who was what they called the Lion of Fallujah. When the Marines had to go into Fallujah and clean it up, he was such a leader and such a follower, and he ended up not making it out of the battle. And at his funeral at the Naval Academy, and you've all been in the Naval Academy chapel many times, it was filled up, and one of the generals there remarked that your troops have to follow you in battle. They don't have to show up at your commemoration ceremony. So I think it's a great tribute to George that they showed up here. Later that day at the burial service at Arlington National Cemetery, one PFC went up to Doug's father and said, if I had to go back to Fallujah today, I would follow your son with a spoon as my weapon. And I think that everybody today, whether a coach or player for George, would go back and play football for him. Got one play left. You got one play left, boys? One play to play? That's all we got. But everybody go back and play that one play. My experience with George runs 22 years. I came back as a Marine officer assigned to the staff in 1975. And I can remember I was supposed to do some menial task one day, and I obviously didn't do it very well. Because George, in that day, he always had pencil. He had a number 2 pencil in between his fingers. And he took his hand and slammed it down and broke the pencil and gave me that look. You all know that look. And said, I got another blanking Marine on my staff. So that was my introduction to George. And from that point on, I said, that's never going to happen again. Now, there's the talk about 1981, we play the worst Army-Navy game in the history of Army-Navy football. It was a 3-3 tie. It was a horrible game. It became a punting contest is what it became. And about a week later, we find out that George has made the decision to come to Virginia. And nobody ever changes a job for any one reason. Everybody can speculate why he wanted to come, but one of the reasons is he thought this place reminded him of home, the mountains and Coaldale and the University of Virginia, and George was never one to not accept a challenge. And certainly we had a major challenge, but one of the calls in the Liberty Bowl that day is our long snapper had been hurt. Bobby Moore broke his 5th metatarsal, so we had to have a backup long snapper and a kid named Murtha. And he had a little hitch in his giddy-up, snapping the ball. So the first 2 times we punt in the Liberty Bowl, they're blocked. So about the 3rd time we're getting ready to punt, Frank Spaziani, who was the punt coach, says to me, I still, from my days as a Marine officer, I was always the go-to guy. Nobody asked George anything. They went to me and said, you go ask George, because when I was a Marine, he couldn't fire me. But then when I joined the set, I became that guy. I said, hey, George, Frank wants to run the punt pass. And he looked at me and goes, what the hell, we can't punt. So we ran the punt pass, goes down the boundary, and we have a hell of a game with Ohio State that day. That was Napoleon McCallum's coming out party. But we lose the game, and then we find out, we're going to be coming to Virginia. And, we were fortunate to come. He brought 6 of us. Frank Spaziani, Art Marcos, Tony Whittlesey, Ken Mack, Bob Petchel, and then Tom Sherman and Nick Gasparotto joined us here. And Sandra called us the Kitty Corps. I think when we hired Sherman was the oldest guy at 35, Petch was 26. So, Sandra always kept complaining that we were too young to be the coaches, but we had the opportunity to come to Virginia, and certainly, not to belabor the point, but we saw the 2 winning seasons in 29 years. won 33 conference games in 29 years. I mean, that's what we walked into. One winning season in 29 years. So we went to work. We picked up our spoon, we came down here, and we went to work. And if you know Coach Welsh, he coached everything. I mean, in those days, he coached the offense, he coached the defense, he coached special teams. He always had a notebook with him, and always had a little golf pencil, and he'd be standing at practice, and he'd be writing stuff. And we'd go in the locker room after some games, and some of those coaches would be going, I'm going to get killed tomorrow. I'm going to get killed tomorrow. He's going to kill. He was writing my whole drill. I'm going to get killed. You know, and George made the practice, one Welshism, don't make any decision in the evening. Get a good night's sleep, make it in the morning. He'd get up early in the morning, he'd do the practice schedule. A lot of college coaches run 5-minute segments. George didn't. I mean, we had 3 minutes, we had 9 minutes, we had 8 minutes. And every morning he'd come in and throw the tablets down on the table, and this is what we were going to practice, and this is how we were going to do it. But we had to learn how to work, and that was the first thing we had to accomplish here. And I think the team that we inherited probably, well, I know for sure, they coined the phrase long before Allen Iverson. Practice? What do you mean we got to practice? That wasn't part of the equation here. We didn't practice. So as we learned to practice, and certainly, we talked about 83, 82 was our first season. We kind of won 83. 84, we went to Peach Bowl. We beat Kansas State to a bowl game. So we did not become the last team ever to be in a bowl game. And I think one of the most iconic moments, I have two memories of Virginia football, was, and it wasn't John Ford and his mother dancing on the logo after the game we won, we beat Purdue. But we go back to the hotel, and if you remember, and those of you that were with us, it was a big atrium hotel that probably went up 10, 12 stories. And it was packed. Each story, people were hanging over. There was a fountain in the middle of the atrium of the hotel, and the pep band in those days, I think Sandra called them the clown band. No offense to the band in those days, but they were on the fountain playing the fight songs as the team came in. And you talk about years of frustration. I mean, I will never forget that as long as I live. But I think the most important season we had, we won in 85, but 86 we lost. We were 3-8 that year. And there's questions after you kind of go to a bowl game and then you win, and then, you have a 3-8 year. There's questions about the leadership of the program. But I think two things were significant about that year. That was the first year we started redshirting people. Coach didn't believe in redshirting people at the start. We came from Navy. You went to Navy. You got out in 4 years. You went to service, and you went. But we redshirted the class, and then we recruited some of these guys behind us, came in 86, which made a difference in the program. And then we certainly got better. We knew how to work. Another Welshism, this game's too hard to play if you can't win. And the kids figured that out. It's a heck of a lot more fun if we're going to practice this hard and work this hard if we can't win. But each significant year we had, 89 was a 10-win season. It was an ACC championship. But you forget, we lost to Notre Dame in the kickoff classic. In fact, we got crushed. I mean, I think it was 30-0 at halftime or something, and Tony Rice was running all over us. But in the pure genius of George Welsh, he doesn't panic. We're in there at halftime, and I guess we're all expecting to get our butts chewed out one way or another. And he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the second half as practice. You can take all that game planning, you can throw it out the window. We're going back to basics. We're going to run base offense, we're going to run base defense. Well, we ended up losing the football game, but we got better in the second half of that football game. And the next week, we have to go to Penn State. Now, who in the world schedules Notre Dame and Penn State to start the season? At that point, it was, this is how we're going to get better. And we win that football game because Sean and Herman reinvent the alley-oop, 14-13, and that basically kicked off the football program we have at Virginia today. About that time we had some changes on the staff. You know, Danny Wilmer came with us, Phil Elmation, Gary Tranquil came back. He was with us at Navy. Rick Lance came back, was with us at Navy. Jim Bowman came with us, and Mike Archer. And they all, about this time frame, were moving on as people are moving out, coming in. George is hiring the best possible people that anybody could hire in this country. And our staff kept getting better and stronger as we went on. The next year, we finally exercised demons, and 0-29, we beat Clemson finally. And I can remember before the game, I can't remember who I was talking to, whether it was Tony or Whittlesey or somebody, is that our skill kids finally looked like Clemson skill kids. Our punt returners, our kickoff returners, our wide receivers, I mean, we started looking like a major college football team at that day. And certainly 20-7 was a big victory, being number one in the country through the month of October. And then getting to go to the Sugar Bowl was a classic opportunity for this program and this football team, and playing Tennessee. And, you know, we gave up the lead with 30 seconds. And the only thing I can remember about that is we didn't hear Rocky Top the whole day till we heard it about 57 times in the last 30 seconds of that game. Then we move on to 95, which is the other iconic moment in history of football, Virginia football. But, you know, we lost to Michigan to open the year. Another one of the kickoff classics, we go to Michigan. And the story there is when I'm at Boston College, the Patriots were going to their first Super Bowl. And their bubble was broken, and we had a bubble, so Bill brought his team over, and Brady comes up, and I'm talking with Tom because he was on the sideline in Michigan. He says, you know, Coach, you should have won that day. And I said, yeah, I know, Tom. And I mean, he had a chapter verse. They had the ball on about the 8-yard line going in with less than 10 seconds left. They snapped the ball. They go back, and I can't remember Michigan quarterback, throws it to the running back at the 4-yard line. The kid drops the ball. I mean, we're going to tackle him. Game's over, we win. He says that kid never drops a ball. They drop the ball, come back, they run post corner. They didn't have instant replay in those days because we're still not sure the ball, you know, we were in bounds, they were in bounds, but we lose to Michigan. But then once again, George always worked on the theory, don't worry about what's going to happen in November. This is a week, every week is a season. You don't know who the trainer, Joe Geek, is going to tell you can play this week. You don't know who their team is going to be, you know, and just work week to week and get better each and every week. We end up going out to Texas, and we lose to Texas on a 50-yard field goal into a 20-mile-an-hour wind at Texas. We lose 17-16, last play of the game. And we have to come back, and we've got a weekend off, excuse me, because we play Florida State the next Thursday. We were a tired football team, and I don't think we practiced for 5 days. I mean, Coach knew that we had to get our legs back. We had to be ready to play. And we came out that night and beat Florida State the first time anybody in the ACC did it. And the pandemonium and rushing the field after the game was the other iconic moment that will always stay with me about the University of Virginia. In fact, my kids were all still grade school, high school then. From every game they went to from then on, all they would do is try to figure out how they were going to rush the field after the game because it was such a good time. In 2000, Georgia's last game was in Hawaii, playing in the Hula or Aloha Bowl or whatever it was. There was 2 bowl games, and I happened to be out there playing. Boston College was playing Arizona State on Christmas Day, and Virginia was playing Georgia on Christmas Eve. And we had gone out early because I knew that Coach was going to go out early, and I didn't know if I'd have the opportunity to spend any time with him. And just arranged the day that both of our teams came in, I went down. We were at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. BC was staying there, and they were down at the Marriott. So I went down and had a cocktail or two with Coach and spent, for George, was a long time talking, maybe 2 hours, before our teams came in that evening. And, you know, certainly thanked him for all he did for me, you know, after 22 years I was with him 16 years before I got named offensive coordinator. I said it was like getting my driver's license. You know, I finally got the chance to be a coordinator. But I thanked him for all of you too, because you know he made us all better people. And I think when you come right down to it, that was the experience and some of the great stories that we were able to hear last night to talk about and you can't retell all of them, but you know, your all experiences with Coach and what he did. And if you look at it, we're all better people for it. And you know, a couple Welsh axioms that I'll leave you with. If you lose by a little, you might as well lose by a lot, because you're still lost. How many times have you heard that one? It was always this. Well, you're that close. Well, it doesn't matter. You might as well be that far away. You're still lost. So axiom number 2 was, well, how are you going to make up whatever that space is? You research it. And when he was, you know, I think John said earlier, he was on the Navy staff. Actually, he was back coaching the Navy as an officer, kind of similar like I did. He coached Roger Staubach. But there was a coach on that staff that had a philosophy, always create a drill. Research it, find out what your problem is, create a drill, and work it. Muscle memory, brain memory, whatever it takes. Make a drill. And the last thing that I'll always remember, and I use it all the time with my team, is as individuals improve, your team improves. As individuals improve in your business will improve. And once again, it was always just get this much better. And in terms of the football team, if 110 guys go out today at practice and get this much better, if you as a coach go out today and get that much better, if you as a trainer or an equipment manager, anybody associated with this program, goes out today and gets that much better, then our football team will be that much better. And it was all about the team. And so I thank you for this opportunity. I want to introduce 2 people. I think Chet, would you stand up a second, Chet? Chet, National Football Hall of Fame, and Jim Dombrowski, both National Football Hall of Fame players for George, along with the present people here on the Diaz, and the other one was Napoleon McCallum at Navy. So, you know, they all went in with George. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Bronco Mendenhall, like George Welsh, knows what it's like to turn Virginia football around, as he did this past season when the Cavaliers went 8-5. Voice fading, sorry, getting old. And my guess is, Bronco, that George would tell you should be over at the spring game right now, because that's pretty important for the head football coach. But he has come over here, taken time out from getting ready for this afternoon spring game. So please welcome Bronco Mendenhall.
I'm humbled and grateful to be able to represent the current UVA football team to the Welsh family. The best gift I can give is humility and gratitude. I remember standing as UVA's new football coach and looking off to my right and seeing Coach Welsh there. And there was a feeling of comfort and certainty, but also expectation. Even as he got older, there was still the command presence, I think is what we called it. And I had a chance to visit with him quickly afterwards. And he asked me, "Why did you come?" And I asked him, "Why did you come?" We found a commonality right then. This was passed on to me from our sports information director, so I thought I would just share a couple of these things, because Coach Welsh's presence, not only when I go into his facility every day, the indoor, but when I see the mural. I talk to it sometimes when no one else is around. Head coaches do that because you don't get a lot of friends. This is what was shared with me. When I was named the head coach at Virginia, I was 49 years old. When Coach Welsh came, he was 49 years old. We started uncovering this as we went. Coach Welsh took over a UVA football program that had experienced 5 losing seasons in 6 years. When I took over this program, 5 losing seasons in 6 years. I brought 7 members of my coaching staff from Brigham Young. Coach Welsh brought 6, as was already shared. Coach Welsh, in his first year, won 2 games. We, in our first year, won 2 games. In his second year, they won 6. In our second year, we won 6. In his third year, they won 8. And in our third year, we won 8. He would be sitting in the break room almost every day when I arrived as the head coach, sipping whatever he was drinking that day and then looking through the newspaper. And I would sit down, and he would say, "How's it going?" And I would ask him, "How do you think it's going?" And he would usually say something like, "You need players," or "You need facilities." There wouldn't be a long, expanded answer. That would just be right to the point. And that helped navigate a new coach at his program to try to have and emulate similar results. What better thing can be done? And all it is a start, but I feel like I am the steward of his program. And that matters to me. And so, as I look about, anytime you take on something that's significant and different and challenging, like those that have climbed Everest, you look for markers. Has anyone been here before? You look for metrics. Am I on the right path? You hope somewhere along the way someone will tell you turn right here or turn left here. I had the good fortune in my first couple of years here to have Coach Welsh there just to, I would say, "What do you think?" And that was very helpful. And for my family and I, and the 14 families we brought, we know exactly what's at stake, and we want more than anything for this program to have the same success. And I look at the names and the faces, I'm humbled by that. To continue on, some of the things that were passed on to me about Coach Welsh was that it was a true meritocracy. George didn't care who you were or where you came from, wasn't worried about how big or fast. But then this point stuck out. Every man had to earn his playing time the old-fashioned way. It's not an accident that one of our core tenets is earned, not given. And if you trace the thread, where is that coming from? Earning your playing time is how it was done here before. And that worked here before. George had integrity, character, and accountability, determination, and standards that motivated those around him to always take whatever the task was to the next level. If you competed or worked for George Welsh, as we've already heard with breaking the pencil, you quickly understood that actions spoke louder than words, and leadership by example was always his way of life and his marching orders. His legacy has and will continue to motivate us in the most meaningful ways every day from Navy's athletic director. And lastly, George Welsh was an extremely tough and demanding coach. We practiced very hard, and every drill was run with precision. George was the type of coach who left no stone unturned, and he held every member of the organization to a high standard. And from himself, George refused to accept limited resources, subpar facilities, strict admission requirements as excuses. He lobbied successfully for enhanced infrastructure and support, but not at the expense of everyday standards. UVA football, when I arrived, had a saying of uncompromised excellence. That was integrity and winning. The "and" in between is also one of our core tenets. If you ever hear our players say "and," if you trace where that's coming from, it's coming from George Welsh, that you can do both. He demonstrated it at Navy, and he demonstrated it here. And now as, I guess I would love to consider myself a protege, but I didn't work with him, but I'm responsible for that standard, which is daunting, but possible, as he proved with the right people that you can do it. And that is my hope. And that is everything that my wife and I and our coaches are trying to do, is to return it to that, because what better standard is there for UVA football? To his family, I'm honored to have been given a quick moment to talk. I'm lucky to be here and privileged to have inherited a program that was run in the manner that it was run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bronco. Thank you for coming over. And Bill Curry, the old coach, says, get your butt back to the spring game now. But thank you for that. It is now my pleasure to introduce a group that played such a major role in all the things that George Welsh accomplished here at Virginia. And to lead that group is, as I make sure I get this right, Rondé, as he described it to me, the better looking of the Barber twins, Rondé Barber.
Thanks, John. Before I get started, I want to thank Franco, Lydell, Charles, your words. Obviously, we don't know that part of George's life, but it sounds like a lot what you talk about is what we're going to talk about. Bob, great stories. Obi, thanks for reminding everybody who got beat on that 95 Michigan game touchdown. Appreciate that. That was me. I'll own that. Hey, everybody, I'm Rondé Barber, class of 97. To my immediate left, everybody knows, probably the most famous Wahoo of all time here, Anthony Poindexter. He was 94 to 98. Christopher, as his email said, Chris Slade, 89 to 92. Everybody knows Sean Moore. He was Coach Welsh's first Heisman Trophy candidate. And Sean Scott, 82 to 85. He was here when Coach, he was one of his, I think, his second recruiting class. And of course, Nick Merritt at the very end. He was here before George got here, and I think we got some good stories. But before we get going, I think we can all agree, especially all of us up here, that George was the embodiment of a leader, and he didn't necessarily do that with a whistle or X's and O's. In fact, when Obi said that he was in control of everything, that shocked me. I don't know if I ever saw George call a play. He was always the guy yelling and kicking everybody out of practice. But I think for all of us, he was a very quiet and stoic leader, someone that you were wary of and probably somewhat scared of. But today we get a chance to celebrate what he was to us and as a football coach and what he meant to everybody on grounds here and everybody in the state, really. I think what he did to turn this program around is special. I had a friend of mine tell me he created a culture of high expectation, right? I think we can all agree when you walked into his office, if you had the misfortune of having to do so, that he was going to expect something out of you. And I was talking to that same friend just this week, and he told me what he thought about George, and I mentioned it's funny that we all think the exact same thing about George without any of us having talked about why we feel that way about him. And I think that speaks to the consistency of him as a person, certainly as a coach. And you know, he formed my athletic years, so to say. I mean, I became a great pro because of my time here at Virginia with George. And I don't know if many of you know me, but played 16 years in the league, and I really didn't care what anybody said about me, including you, John, sorry. But he was somebody that I cared what he said about me, and not only that, what he expected of me. And he was a mentor when I needed one. Later in life, he was a friend that I relished seeing when I had the opportunity. So I'm here, along with my 5 comrades here, to say thanks, Coach, and express our utmost appreciation for the time that we spent here on grounds with him. You know, when you're gone, all you have is your legacy. His legacy is pretty big. I think we can all agree that. So get this panel discussion going, and you guys can chime in wherever you want. First question for me, which of you has the best George impersonation? Nobody? No takers?
They all out in the audience.
Well, I have one. I have one, and it relates to Obi. So, thank you for talking to me to Michigan. I'm telling the story that Tiki told me that you said about him. So I can't remember what game it was. It may have been Georgia Tech, right? And George goes to Coach O'Brien and says, "Why are we not calling XYZ play?" Obi, in his infinite wisdom and confidence at that point, says, George, I don't know. Why don't you call the plays? George's response is classic. Because I can't! I'm not sure even what happened, but I know you know what story I'm talking about. But let's go back to the beginning. Nick, you were here in '81. George came in '82. Tell me your first impression of his coaching style.
Well, first, let me talk to contrast the then versus the now. Now there's this amazing training table and facilities. Back then we had meal tickets and we ate at Shoney's most meals. There's an amazing grass field that drains unbelievably. We played on a concrete field that was painted green, and it was so bowed that when you looked across the side, you only saw someone's head and their shoulders. You couldn't see the rest of their body. And it was usually would take about 4 ACLs a year just by people walking on it. And last but not least, today, players have unbelievable swag. The uniforms, the helmets, all the workout stuff, all that kind of stuff. But what we had then, which really was a huge advantage, were these UVA shorts. The all-cotton champion short with either the red or the green piping, and I still have a pair of these. But when I think back to when Coach Welsh showed up, I think the phrase that comes to mind is shock and awe. I think they were really shocked at the state of affairs, and I think Coach Welsh knew that it would take time. He made the changes that he had to make right away. For instance, getting us out of the Cavalier Inn the night before games and other things. And other things, it would take time. And I think we were in awe of just the discipline and the approach and just how methodically he took out the game of football. And I think they also were pretty pleased after a while with the core group of players that they had. They knew that there was a lot of work to be done. They knew there were other players that had to be recruited, but just looking at people that are here, people that went on, that were part of the Peach Bowl team, that went and played in the NFL and were other strong contributors. So it was a good mix of something that was already there that needed to be worked on quite a bit, and then bringing in lots of new dynamic players and a lot of discipline and a lot of hard work.
George had a lot of idiosyncrasies, you could say, right? He was always twitching, always playing with his face, picking his nose, So Nick was the last on this or the first on this panel to be with George. Anthony Poindexter was the last. He was here till '98. So give me a sense, was George a softer version of George when you left here, or was he still that same prickly guy?
He was still that prickly guy, man. I mean, me personally, I almost feared him in a respect way. Even though, I thought I was playing good football, I still was scared to go to his office. I was terrified when they named me captain, because then they all wanted me to go in there and ask them certain things, and I'm just like, man, I'm not doing it. And I just remember we'd be at hotels, and he would get on the elevator or be on the elevator, and you would just wait or take the steps because you're like, nah, I'm not getting on there with him. It was just odd, awkward silence. But the one thing about him, he treated everyone the same way, and so it was just. I know Coach said he coached everything, but towards my ending career, I'll see him laying on the bank. He'd be over there practicing the option play. By himself. So he was just, and frankly, once I got out of playing and I came back here and started coaching, that's when I really saw the real Coach Welsh, and then I had to almost start to avoid him sometimes, because if I had stuff to do, he would want to hold a conversation. I'd be like, who is this guy I'm talking to? He'd he'd hold a 30-minute conversation. I'm like, who is this guy? But no, he was just always respected, and I still, even to this day, I would fear him, but in a respect way.
It's interesting you mentioned coaching. Two of our panelists here currently coaches. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you this. George was able to draw on his success as a player to make him a better coach. Can you speak to that, to what George provided you to make you a better coach?
Yeah, I think this is the foundation of being here and being around Coach Welsh for the 4 years, the discipline, the structure, how to conduct practice, how to be efficient, how to get through each period without wasting a lot of time. And the main thing is, if you're on time, you're late. That was his thing all the time. So just those different methods and different ways that he would do things, I definitely try to take some of those methods and terminology and some of those things in my coaching.
I know we all have recruiting stories. Mine's pretty interesting. Obviously, he was recruiting 2 of us at the time. But Sean Scott, second recruiting class of George's. Give me the thing or the things that George said to you to get you to come here. This was a program that was floundering at the time.
Yeah, their goal, you could feel that you had an opportunity to be something special, and I really did. Coming in, I also had a brother that just graduated from Clemson, and so
unfortunately,
yeah, and it's fair to say we weren't on that level at this point, but you really sold it where we're going to change some things here, and I call it the whole coaching crew, and especially Coach Welsh. I drank the juice. I was on board, and I truly came to UVA. I'm from Northern Virginia, grew up there all my life, and I felt that maybe we can do something here that's like a part of history, start something really good. And my whole class, there's a bunch of them I'm looking out right now. We just felt that this was our opportunity to do something special and grow with the program. And it's funny because I see Coach Mendenhall, there are similarities, and it's exciting, very exciting.
Well, that segues us right into Sean Moore, who in '86 came here. He was redshirted. But it was during that time, Sean, when, you get the National Player of the Year, Terry Kirby. Slade comes in a couple of years later. Ray Roberts, all these guys are coming into the program. Sean just told us he drank the Kool-Aid. What was it then?
Well, I got to be honest. In '86, Obi brought up a really good point. George wanted to redshirt that entire class, and I think that was a very unique class because most of us came from in-state. We were having conversations during the recruiting process. Ray Savage, Keith McMeans, Paul Collins, Ron Carey, we were all from in-state. And I'll never forget in '86, George had that plan to redshirt us all. And the first game of the year, we played South Carolina, nationally ranked. And they're loaded. And we beat the brakes off of South Carolina here at Scott Stadium. And we're all, as freshmen, like, we're going to national championship. We're on our way. We lost 9 straight after that. And literally, George started talking about, removing some red shirts. And I was like, oh, I don't want to play. Look, we're talking about transferring now because we're wondering if we came to the right program. But George stuck to the plan. And that '86 class was crucial because all those guys redshirted. We played in '87. We made an impact in '88, '89, '90. That class, in my opinion, if you talk to a lot of guys, we were the first class to really get it started. And we were able to get guys like Chris Slade and Terry Kirby because they saw what we were doing. Those kids that were in state, they knew that we had something special brewing here.
So Danny Wilmer was the guy who will say recruited me to Virginia, but really it was when George showed up at my high school is when I kind of thought I was a big deal. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, we grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. To me, that felt small town, even though I know it's not, it's like somewhere where you're from, Dex. But I knew who George Welsh was, and when he walked in the door, you couldn't mess with me. I saw him walk through the building. You get the, can Tiki and Rondé Barber please come to the principal's office? Whatever. You're like, okay. And George Welsh is sitting in there, and I will never forget it. It was an indelible moment for me, and it's the reason why I came to school here, because he was the first head football coach to show up at my high school. You talked about the change in the program, Sean. Nick, what was the change really like? Because you had experience with, bad football teams. We all know what preceded George Welsh here. In your mind, could you see the change happening then, even back then?
You could, And one of the marks of a bad football team, my first year, which was the year before Coach Welsh showed up, you play, I think we played 6 or 7 away games, and 4 or 5 of those were the other team's homecoming game. So that's actually a way that you know that you're not a good football team. But it really wasn't any one thing. There were markers along the way that made you think we're making progress. Like I think the winning season, we went 6-5 and we beat Carolina in a game, the second last game. That was a real marker that we were making good progress. But you could see over the course of the first year that we were getting better and better. Coach Welsh said to us several times, "You're a bad football team," and we all kind of nodded our heads. But we knew progress was being made. People that were C players were elevating to B, Bs were elevating to As, and then there was some great new talent being brought into the program. So it was kind of a passage with a couple points along the way. And I will say, and I'll second what Coach O'Brien said, that moment in Atlanta after we won the Peach Bowl, in your life you get a handful of perfect moments, and that for us was a perfect moment, really celebrating tremendous success. And it wasn't winning a national championship, but it felt like it.
I know that George did a lot for us as men, and we carry a lot of what he taught us or what we learned with him in this program onto our regular lives now. And I think, Sean, you have a great example of this, Sean Scott, about when you first got here, before you were a stud defensive end. Tell me your special team story.
Well, I kind of have 2 stories. I'll make them quick and I'll tie them together. The first story is first year, true freshman, first day of hitting. The pads are on, separate the men from the boys. We're going to go, we're going at it. And I'm excited. I still remember, hey, go to the outside, Scott. You're on punt block team. Give him a look. And Coach Welsh is on the tower. So I'm pumped. I'm jacked. And so I'm giving a good rush. I lay out, and I take the punter's leg out. I mean, it was a good hit. Just not a good hit you want to make, though. And Coach Welsh comes running off the tower. And I'd never seen a grown man act that way, where he was in my face. It was because it's your head coach. It was an awakening, and so he lets into me, and now I'm mad at myself. I'm disappointed at myself. Next play, I'll show him. I'm gonna get it this time. All right. Next play, I lay out. And do it again. I take the punter out again. And Coach Welsh threw me off the field. I won't go into the language, but I think the quote was, "You'll never play for me again." And so I go to the locker room, and I'm by myself thinking I lost my scholarship. I got to call my dad to come pick me up. It's all gone, all right? So I'm going to go to story number 2. It's only 3 or 4 weeks later, we're opening up with Clemson. And I've been working hard, to me, I'm starting on kickoff team, and I'm loving life. I mean, I think everyone remembers their first college play. It's like running on a cloud. I was wedge breaker. I don't remember after hitting the wedge, but I did it, all right? So you remember those things. But from then on, it was downhill. Clemson, it was a nasty, nasty game. Clemson's just tearing us up, and it's halftime. And I get kind of a side information that, hey, Coach Welsh is going to put you in. And I mean, I wasn't even on the depth chart starting this game. And I'm going to play against Clemson in the second half. And so I go in the second half, and I like to say I won the game, but no, we lost 55-0. It wasn't pretty. But I held my own. It was the next day, Sunday. We're breaking down film, and they said, well, we're not going to separate. We're going to do it as a team. And Coach Welsh made a comment to some sort of that I earned that spot, and that's a true freshman is the only one that has that spot for the next game in his way. And so the reason I tell those 2 stories is because without story 1, story 2 would have never happened. It was humbling. I had to kind of figure out where to go from there, and then I was given an opportunity. And I know Ronnie, your brother made a commercial that's pretty cool. It's like seizing the opportunity, so I seized that opportunity. But life is also about those people who make those opportunities possible. And Coach Welsh, I didn't go on to play pro. I'm a retired police officer. I served 25 years there, and I teach criminal justice now. And those lessons I learned from Coach Welsh, they make who I am today. They made me as my law enforcement career, I was a sergeant on the SWAT team. I ran training like Coach Welsh ran practice. I mean, the things you picked up, attention to details, teamwork, passion. These were all traits that every player has been fortunate enough to experience under Coach Welsh. And I'll just finish this off with this point. I have a boy that's 16 years old, and I just pray that he could have the college experience in a football program that I have. With the people, the coaches, the players, and all the attributes that come with it, and also, and more importantly, the head coach, Coach Welsh. It was an honor, it was a privilege, and all I can say is thank you.
Chris, you came in a little more heralded. You were an All-American high school. Probably didn't play special teams like Sean. I did. You did you? Oh, good. I know I did. So, what was your lasting impression of George when you left? I know sometimes it takes time to gain a perspective, but what was your lasting impression of him?
I think most guys who play for Coach Welsh, you really don't get to know him when you play for him. You just kind of like ease off and you graduate and go into your next career, whether it's in the NFL or in the workforce. And then, like to Anthony's point, as the time went on and the years went on, I kind of reflected back and said, man, that was a really good coach, a guy that everyone would say taught life lessons, really learned how to be a man. And that was the thing that I really learned from Coach Welsh. And as I look back, and a couple of years, I'm a high school coach, like you said, in Atlanta. And 3 years ago, we won the state championship. And Coach Welsh actually sat down and wrote a handwritten letter to me personally to my school. And I didn't even think that Coach Welsh even kept up, knew what I was doing in terms of my career. And I still have that letter on my desk today. And he, just congratulating me and saying, I'm proud of you, I've watched you, I've been following you. And, this 3 years ago. And so just everybody talks about how hard Coach Welsh was, and he was very tough, but he also had the other side to him. And you don't really see it till you get older, till you graduate. It's almost like he draws that fence. You're not going to cross it until later on. And so I was one of the, like many guys, able to cross that fence later on in life.
So both you and Sean were on that team that won their first ACC championship. In 1990, you were ranked number one. Sean, how did this program, because of George, turn into the number one team in the country? And that is a question that I think everybody wants to know, because within 8 years, you go from being a laughingstock to being top in the NCAA.
I think one of the things that goes kind of understated is George was a great evaluator of talent. And I think, it's indicative of guys like Coach O'Brien and Coach Tranquil and Spaziani that went on to be head coaches. They were also a product of George. They were able to evaluate talent like no one. And I think it was just amazing what he was able to do with the talent he had starting in 86 and 87 and 88. And it just progressed. But I will say this, one of the things I wanted to add was some of the best conversations that I've had with Coach Welsh was after football was over. And
Absolutely.
Coach Poindexter and I was fortunate enough to be here together. Some of the best conversations we've ever had was sitting in the lunchroom talking to Coach. And it's like Deck said, he could carry on a conversation. And before that, you really didn't get to know Coach. But after it was all over and you were doing whatever you're doing, whether it's coaching or in the workforce, you really got to know, and you got to know the real man.
Well, Anthony, you had a lot of experiences here, good and bad. Just popped into my mind a question. Obviously, you had your horrific injury that ended your last season here. What did Coach say to you then? What was his reaction to that?
Oh man, he was so sad, because if you rewind a year before that, I had a decision to make in January whether I was going to come back to school or leave. And I'm sitting around, and I work up enough confidence to go into his office. And I had made it up in my mind. I was going to come back to school, and I thought he'd be more like, yeah, you need to. And so I sit in front of him. Again, I'm sweating, I'm shaking in my boots, and I said, Coach, I want to come back and play for you. And he was like, that's great, but son, you need to do what you need to do. I have my money, my family taken care of. You need to do what you need to do to take care of your family. And I didn't realize you was rated this high. And he was like, if you go, I understand, and you just make this decision based on you. And at that moment, I really, I didn't know he had that side to him, one, and I really just saw him really caring for me and my family and my situation. And then you go a year later, I think it almost crushed him. But in my mind, it was all good for me because I came back because I wanted to come back. He didn't talk me into coming back. He didn't force me into coming back. He didn't try to make me feel sad that he was leaving. He told me to make decisions that was best for me. And quite frankly, looking at him, I think he was telling me to leave, but I was just having a good time being in college, and I loved playing with my teammates, so I came back. But, obviously, and like I said, I still think that was the best decision that I made in my life to come back to school and play for him for another year and learn all the life lessons. And I probably learned more through getting injured than I would have ever learned by going off and playing years and years in the league. So, but he just, he was an amazing guy. And like I say, more and more, we got to know each other, and especially when I got hurt, because I would go and sit in his office, and he would always come check on me. And he just had that side to him, which I really didn't know, but and guys know now, we all got these funny stories of him and how scared we were of him and how he talked to us, but, he really did have a sentimental side to him, and quite frankly, he treated me like I was his son, so.
Well, before we close here, I'm going to ask each of you to give what would have been your last encounter with him, your playing days. But before we do that, I'm going to give you my 2 encounters that I had with George Welsh. And ironically, he said the same thing in both of them. So in '93, when I come to school here, they're on the redshirt path. They're redshirting a lot of guys, and they didn't redshirt my brother, but he was going to redshirt me. And so I went into his office, and yada yada yada, you put it whatever. But the sense I got was, "You're not ready." Okay, thanks, Coach. I'll take the redshirt year. Fast forward 4 years later, I've been all ACC. I'm ready to leave. My brother's graduating. All my roommates are graduating. I walk into George's office for probably only the second time and said, "Coach, I think I'm ready to make the decision to go to the NFL." Same response. "You're not ready." And Christ, Rondé, you need another year. And obviously, I played a long time in the NFL, but to his credit, I wasn't ready. I went to the NFL, and I played 1 game my rookie year. I probably would have benefited from staying another year here and getting to be a team captain and do the things that a fifth-year senior needed to do. But I'm going to ask you guys, if you guys could share before we close here, just your last memory of George before you left school.
Well, my last memory, because I did get hurt, midway through that 98 season, was just once I was able to get back on my feet and be able to travel, he allowed me to go with the team and still be the team captain. And, and that was, back in the day, if you didn't practice, you didn't play. And obviously, if you was crippled like I was at that point, you weren't going anywhere. And he really made the sacrifice with the staff and everybody to let me go all the places. Anything I wanted to do, he allowed me to still be a part of the team, still be, assume the leadership role. And I just remember being at Tech. I don't know why he would let me do this, but I was on crutches. I had a cast on. I mean, and it got hostile. And that's the game that we came back and beat them late. And I mean, by the time the end of the game, I threw the crutches down. I'm yelling at the Tech fans, and I mean, it's going crazy. And that's probably why he didn't want me there. But I mean, that's my lasting impression. That he just allowed me to continue to be a part of the team, and he knew it was important to me. And I thank him for that every day.
I think one of my last, I had a lot of kind of last impressions, but one of the stories, and the guys who played on the 91 team will will know this, and then maybe the guys who were right before that as well. So obviously in '90 was the epic Georgia Tech game. We get beat by Georgia Tech, Scott Sisson last-second field goal. The very next year, we go down to Atlanta to play Georgia Tech. Same thing happens. We get beat last-second field goal, Scott Sisson, Thursday night, national and televised game. So after the game's over with, and you guys have all played for Coach Welsh, when you get into the locker room, it's silence. It's silence during pregame. You can't talk. I mean, the whole nine. Don't drop a penny. So we come in the locker room after the Georgia Tech game. We're all sitting around, just somber, upset because we lost the same way 2 years in a row. And all of a sudden, the athletic director at the time was Jim Copeland. Copeland's in the back, kind of laughing a little bit, talking a little bit too loud. Then all of a sudden, I got my head down, and Coach Welsh goes, "Jim, what's so funny?" And I'm like, Jim goes, "Coach Welsh, I wasn't laughing," and I wasn't. "I saw you. You were laughing." And I got my head down, and I'm like, "That's the athletic director. Coach Welsh just called out." I said, so that just goes to prove and go to show nobody was off limits when it came to Coach Welsh and the way he ran his program. And when he meant silence, he meant silence. So that was one of my last impressions.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be a two-year captain, and I think George and I had a unique bond. And it wasn't until I was talking to a former teammate, this week, that and I always thought George treated me differently. I really did. Being a quarterback, and some think quarterbacks are super sensitive, but I was talking to an old teammate, and he said at the Florida Citrus Bowl, where we went in '89 after the ACC championship, a couple guys went out after curfew, and they got caught. And one of the guys happened to be the star receiver, Herman Moore. And so the next day at practice, we're getting ready for the game, and George is, these guys that are out are on the field running. And sure enough, Herman's on the exercise bike, getting ready for practice. And George told the guys, he said, "Look, I'm going to treat you all fair, but not evenly." And so I've always thought, we have this special bond because I always thought George treated me differently. And that's something that, the last impression I have is seeing him at a football game and watching the game with him and just talking about life and talking about family. And I cherish I cherish the opportunity to do that with him.
My last college game was the All-American Bowl against Brigham Young, and it was actually my last play was a tackle. And I remember, afterwards talking with Coach Welsh, and kind of he was hard. I was a captain 2 years ago, but I didn't have those friendly conversations that you had. So, but it was kind of a thing where we reflected on some things, and I enjoy that. I agree with what everyone's saying. As I came back to games over the years, it was kind of like your relationship changed. It was no more longer a player-coach, but he put the wall down to where it was more personable, and I enjoyed those, and I appreciate those. And it was also an opportunity just to tell him that I appreciate what he did for me as well.
I was never totally sure that Coach Welsh knew my first name. He said Merrick, and he said Christ, and he said "you're slow" a lot in the same sentence, but he never said the word Nick. So I never really was totally sure about that. My last interaction with Coach Welsh was attending a game probably 7-8 years ago, and I had my son with me, who at that time was a high school quarterback and hoping and thinking about playing college football. And Coach Welsh extended an act of kindness. He took my son, talked to him for a couple minutes, told him some positive things about me, and it really was a gift. And it was a way, I think, of him saying to me, thank you for what you did, but it was a total act of kindness and one I appreciate very much.
Thank you, and thanks for the time that you allowed us to tell a couple of these stories. In closing here, George's legacy is going to be booked in by the two dates that we see up here, August 26, 1933, and January 2nd, 2019. And I don't know if any of y'all have heard or read this poem, The Dash by Linda Ellis. I'm going to close with an excerpt from it. He says, "I read of a man who stood to speak at a funeral of a friend. And he referred to the dates on the tombstones from the beginning to the end. He noted that the first date of birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash in between those years. For that dash represents all the time spent alive on earth, and now only those who love him know what that little line is worth. And I think, speaking on behalf of my 5 panelists up here and every NFL or every college football player that played for him at Virginia, that his dash was pretty significant. So thank you, John.
How about a little extra round of applause for these 6 guys? By the way, in 1990, when Virginia got to be ranked #1 in the country, and again, I was around for the pre-George Welsh days, I actually wrote that Virginia being ranked #1 in the country in football might have been the greatest upset in sports since the Lake Placid Olympics. And I don't think I was that far wrong. It was just amazing what George Welsh did, what Tom and other coaches did, what these guys did then and later, of course. But I'm just going to give you one cliched line. I know you've all heard it before, but if a measure of someone's life is the number of lives they've touched, these guys are all great examples of George Welsh's life, and I think we all feel that way. My next introduction is very, very simple because I'll say it very, very quickly. Hall of Fame player, Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame person. Please welcome Bill Curry.
Did I look funny walking up here? If you sit on these chairs, your legs go numb. I almost went straight on my nose. Who among us, given the opportunity to see in retrospect after we leave the earth, wouldn't just revel in the wonder and the joy and the beauty of what George Welsh accomplished in the lives of so many? And yes, of course, the student athletes were important. His family was more important. And I'm honored to be here with the Welsh family. And I want to say thank you to Carla Williams and to Jim Daves, who facilitated all this coming together. But in our best prayers, all of us who have worked with young people would pray for a day like this, not in honor of us, but in honor of what happens with the team. Rudyard Kipling understood the jungle and the team. Now this is the law of the jungle, as old and as true as the sky. And the wolf that shall keep it may prosper, and the wolf that shall break it must die. As the creeper girdles the tree trunk, we looketh forward and back. The strength of the pack and the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Every single young person that was exposed to George Welsh's brand of discipline understood that the team is what really matters, not the individual. And that the individual, regardless of talent level, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the other demands, can always make a contribution. But it also goes for the competitors. And I know that I'm here to represent those of us that had the awful duty of looking across the field and seeing that funny hat on sideways with those steely eyes just glaring at me, so that my goal became, as a coach when we played UVA, is to make him take that thing off and throw it on the ground as many times as possible. I hated to look across the field and see George Welsh, because I knew he was smarter than me. And he was probably smarter than anybody on our sideline. I knew he could beat us with his brain and with these monsters that you've met here today. And when I saw these monsters, 2 of whom were my teammates, and God bless you, it's so great to see you. Actually, Franco and I played in a Pro Bowl together one time, and I hope we blocked somebody for you, Franco. But the privilege of George may have had limited talent for a while at UVA, but here is the starting backfield at Penn State University. And you wonder, they told us, one of the guys said, threw one pass in one game. Why'd you throw a pass with that much running the ball? Our goal was to compete with the University of Virginia and one of the great intellects and one of the great adjusters to the law of the jungle, because you'll be eaten alive in our business if you don't learn to do those things. But there's another side to George Welsh, and I'm thrilled to get to present it from the opponent's standpoint. Bear in mind, we weren't just opponents, we were Georgia Tech. We were somebody that Virginia needed to beat, because we were another one of those academic schools, and they couldn't afford to lose to an academic school and then go play other schools whose names will remain silent. And they made a big deal about whipping one of those earlier. He walks up to me, it's 1985. We had the best football team, and we had followed a similar path, so we didn't have George Welch to engineer ours. We had a 37-year-old snot-nosed former NFL player. The worst possible preparation to be a college head football coach is to play in the NFL for a long time, because it took every fiber of my being to play offensive center. My job was to hike the ball and be run over slowly. But here's what another factor. I happened to play for Vince Lombardi and Don Shula. I happened to snap the ball to Bart Starr and Johnny Unitas. So not only did other people think I knew some football, I thought I knew a lot of football. I knew no football compared to George Welsh. And we learned that in spades when we played against Virginia. So it was a learning process. But as we gathered on the field for the obligatory handshake, George shocked me when he walked up and he said, "You have a freshman daughter at the University of Virginia." I said, yeah, we sure do. Kristen Curry. We were so proud of her. He said, "Tell Kristen to give us a call, because she'll be welcome to come to our house, and we'll make her some blueberry muffins or something, and Sandra will help her wash her clothes and press her clothes." I said, "George," first of all, as I got up off the ground, because that's not what you expected. You expected those steely eyes and that handshake. Good luck, hope nobody gets hurt. We're both standing there praying that we can crush each other and embarrass the other guy before the game is over, because he's one of the greatest competitors that ever lived, and we all know that. That's another thing we're celebrating here today, aren't we? We love great competitors in this country. He knows my daughter's name. He's talking to me. What, is he trying to soften me up before he... They're not going. Kristen, I said, first of all, Kristen's not going to call anybody. Our daughter is so quiet that she doesn't call anybody. She doesn't even call home. So she's not going to call your house, George. She, by the way, she became an English teacher. I said, "Sweetheart, English teachers have to speak." They're very funny, Dad. I think I can do that now. She's been doing that for 22 years, so it worked out beautifully. And her experience at the University of Virginia, I texted her this morning, and it's true. She could go to the Welch's home, get away from all the hustle and bustle, sit quietly, which is what she really needed to do at that time. And yes, Sandra helped her with her clothes. We never, ever forgot that. By the way, that 85 team was by far our best football team while I was at Georgia Tech, and the last thing I saw was the first thing I saw that day, which was Barry Word running into the end zone over and over and over. We got hammered by the University of Virginia. Y'all can go ahead and clap, it's all right. I'd like to tell you I'm over it, but I'm not. We only lost 2 games that year. One was to Barry Word and Dombrowski and all those monsters you guys had up front, and the other to a guy named Bo Jackson. He gave us a hard time as well. Unexpected, undeserved, unrewarded acts of kindness from great leaders and great ladies like Sandra change lives. Unexpected, undeserved, unrewarded acts of kindness from a great competitor who's just getting ready to beat your brains out, but who, with utter sincerity, invites your daughter to his home. That changes lives. A few years later, I gave George a call. Our son, I was at Alabama, and our son, I sat down with Bill Jr. He's here today. He loves it here. His wife is here. His 5 redheaded boys are here. He intends for all of them to go to the University of Virginia, if at all possible. But he and I sat down to have a conversation about his future. He said, well, I know what I'm going to do, Pop. I said, good. Let me in on it. What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to walk on at the University of Alabama. I'm going to play for you. And a voice from the next room, his mama, Carolyn, who's also here today, walked in the room and said, not a chance. If University of Virginia will have you, that's where you're going. I said, well, let me call George. So I called George Welch, and the conversation lasted about 30 seconds. Typical George. Hey, George, look, I may have a good long snapper for you down here in Alabama. Are we talking about Billy? I said, yeah, we're talking about Billy. What's his SAT? I gave him the SAT. He said, send him up on a visit. We'll take a look. Billy spent 5 of the best years of his life under George Welch and learned the law of the jungle and the law of team better from George than he did from his father, because I think he listened to George better than he listened to his father. He also, the one thing I vowed about my son is that he would never hike a football, because I was a long snapper for 20 years and not a very good one. But he snapped the ball for George Welch 47 consecutive games of some of the great teams that America has produced under the leadership of George Welch here at the University of Virginia. It was life-changing for him. Unexpected, undeserved, unrewarded acts of kindness change lives. When you get an opportunity to go earn the reward and to do your very best, that's how you become a man, and that's how you become educated about the real world. Opportunities change lives. Opportunities from great leaders. Bill tells a story of how he became the starting long snapper, and he still suspects that George sort of did this, sort of arranged this. But the starting center was the long snapper, and in those we were just transitioning from when we didn't allow starting centers to snap the ball if we had somebody else that could do it. So he has the long snapper. Billy thinks he arranged it so that the young man snapped the ball over the punter's head, and then George used some words which I will not repeat here and said, get him out of there and get Curry in there. And so that was Billy's opportunity, and I'm not sure other coaches would have given him the opportunity in such a dramatic fashion and changed his life such that he now brings his sons to this school and prays that they'll be able to come here, and I do too. The thing that maybe shocked us the most, that may surprise you the most, is that following Bill Jr.'s graduation, as he walked down the lawn, he was more nervous about what happened after graduation than to walk across and get his diploma, because the Welches had invited us to their home where George and Sandra were going to serve lunch to the Currys, just us. It wasn't a team thing this time. So we go inside and we're happily greeting George and Sandra, and I noticed that Billy's not in the house. I walked back out and he's standing in the driveway. I said, what's the problem, pal? He said, I can't go in there. That's Coach Welch's house. I said, you're coming in here because it'd be embarrassing to Sandra and George. And the head coach of the University of Virginia and his wife served us lunch after the graduation of one of his players. I don't know who else does things like that. Not many people. In their home, unconditional love changes lives. There was nothing in it for George and Sandra. My last little story sort of demonstrates George's bizarre sense of humor. I had not encountered much of George's sense of humor until, by golly, George and Sandra invited us to go on vacation with them to Nantucket. Now, this is before Bill played for them. So we go to Nantucket, and Of course, that's a beautiful place, and we had a wonderful time. And John Havlicek, God bless him and God rest his soul, we lost him a couple of days ago. The great Boston Celtic had a fishing tournament, of all things. And so we were asked, George and I were asked, would you like to go out and participate in the fishing tournament? You know, you catch a bunch of fish and you'll get a Havlicek t-shirt or something. So we go out on the boat, and I'm out on the boat, and I'm kind of impressed to be on a boat with a naval officer. And I thought, George is going to really enjoy this. We're out about a half hour. He says, I'm seasick. You have to take me back. What? I'm not seasick. I've never been on a boat like this. You're the naval officer and you're seasick, and we got to take you back to shore? Are you kidding me? He didn't find that amusing. He said, yes, no, I'm not kidding you. Take me back. So we get off the boat, and he turns, and his final parting shot to the crew was, this is all Bill Curry's fault. Now, how the hell he came up with that, I never figured out. But when I caught up with him, I noticed there was a little puckish grin around the corners of his mouth. He was having some fun, and so did I. God bless George Welsh. We love you, George. We all became better human beings and better competitors because of you, and we will never forget you.
And now, excuse me, and now we come to those who knew George Welsh best and longest. Please welcome Adam Houdini Welsh and his sister Kate.
I'd like to thank my cousin Anna Yoder for being here, and with her husband, Captain Steve Yoder, United States Navy. I'd like to thank y'all for coming to the funeral too, and your brother, Lou Gregus, who's also my cousin, obviously, and your daughters, Allison, Bridget, and Colette. It's great to see you again. It's great to see all the people that came down from Penn State too. Lydell, I was a big Baltimore Colts fan when we lived in Annapolis. I was a big fan of yours. Good morning, all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Welsh, the youngest of George Welsh's children. I would like to thank Jim Booz and all the good people at the University of Virginia for such a thoughtful tribute to my father. I would also like to thank all of you in attendance today and the hundreds of people who have shared their feelings with us over our father's passing. We are truly grateful. It has eased our suffering. It is so wonderful to see so many familiar faces from Penn State, the Naval Academy, and the University of Virginia. I'm certain my father would want me to mention that his football players deserve the bulk of the credit for his successes. Your exhaustive efforts as students, athletes, and your conduct as gentlemen were why his football programs were rightly viewed by so many as institutions of quality, integrity, and decency. Thank you also for tolerating his coaching methods, which could be interpreted at times as lacking in grace. His concern for you was rarely expressed, but it was ever present, although it may not have seemed so while he was bellowing expletives at you on the practice field. The first Virginia game after my dad's retirement was an unfortunate loss at Wisconsin. I was alone with my father shortly after this game, and he was pacing back and forth, saying over and over, "You know, I really feel bad for those kids. It really would have been great if they could have won that one." You men also provided obvious sustenance for our family. We consider all of you as family members. Thank you deeply. Thanks very much to Coach Mendenhall for the wonderful peace lilies that he sent everyone in my family. I would like to specifically thank Tiki Barber, whose heartfelt speech about my father on the Tiki and Tierney show was a reminder of just how many lives my father touched and enhanced in a positive way. Thank you to all the assistant coaches and their families. Coach O'Brien, it's great to have you here. Coach Marcos, great to have you here also. Your enormous unheralded contributions, are greatly appreciated. Thank you to Linda Zorb for being a friend and caretaker to my father. Thanks also to Jerry Capone for everything. I must bring attention to my wonderful mother, Sandra Welsh, who passed away almost 4 years ago. I know many of the football players remember my mom with fondness. Her great humor, her unyielding kindness, and her upbeat, supportive nature created a family atmosphere for my father's teams. She has been sorely missed by myself and many others. George Welsh's father worked in the coal mines of Coaldale, Pennsylvania. George was obsessed with football from a young age. He would design football plays on the kitchen table using salt and pepper shakers. When he played quarterback for Coaldale High School, the field was often so frozen white that they had to line the field with the black ash from burned coal. This field had so many rocks on it that it was once condemned, and they had to play at their opponent's field. He certainly rose from austere circumstances. My father was a man of service and not a self-serving man. He belonged to two institutions, the military and football, where one serves something greater than the self with no financial goal. I was often asked whether he was a domineering father and a taskmaster of our participation in sports. This wasn't true at all. He wouldn't even let us play football until we were in high school because he feared poor coaching. And I'm thankful for this now. He set a great example for us of being above the pettiness of some sports fans. He was an intensely practical man, yet he was actually pretty laid back in the home. Although he worked obsessively as a coach and shouldered the immense burden of every game, he still had a healthy perspective concerning football. Once, when he was asked by a reporter if an upcoming game was a must-win, he said, "World War II was a must-win." He was a realist and was incapable of insincerity. My father was an extraordinarily generous man. His sometimes aloof nature dissipated in his later years. While I was having some health issues last summer, he told me often that he loved me and that he was praying for me. He set a great precedent for me of stoicism in the face of great challenge and to approach problems methodically without investing unnecessary emotion. On a very personal level, when I knew my father died, I realized I had lost a very close friend. No one will ever care about me more than he did. Today, however, is a day of celebration. My sister and brothers welcome your condolences and appreciate them, but I hope today will be joyous. Thank you for listening.
Anyone who ever gave you confidence, you owe them a lot. Truman Capote, from Breakfast at Tiffany's, spoken by Audrey Hepburn. Anyone who ever gave you confidence, you owe them a lot. I can say that about my father. From the time he's being raised by him, there were 3 things I got: self-confidence, self-esteem, and a strong belief that I could do anything I wanted as long as I put my heart and soul into it. I believed in myself, I worked hard, and I never gave up. Confidence is contagious. And I think I was speaking with Jim Dombrowski on the phone about a month ago. I think you said, Dad mentioned, you can learn to lose, and you stay there. So when you think about confidence, I'm not the only one in this room who got some of that confidence from him. I dare say the football players, being recruited, got confidence that they could play at a top 10 school and do well. And that was contagious to the football program, the coaches, and then, of course, the athletic department, and then from the athletic department through to the university, and which, of course, spills out into the community. This town, who never had a winning program, became more and more confident as the players became more confident. It's a gift, and it's a gift not easily given and gratefully received. I was lucky. Many of you know I was very fortunate, perhaps blessed, to be able to spend the last 3.5 months of Dad's life living with him. I live in New York City, and I had some time, in between time, and I said, you know what? This was back in August. I said, I'm gonna go down to Charlottesville, bring my Labrador Retriever, spend time with my dad, he's 85, no guarantees. I'm gonna bank that time. Well, there were no guarantees, because I was here on January 2nd. Just some mints. But Bill, it's your fault. So I happened, and it was odd because we stayed in this, he was in independent living at the time. Everything, you know, he was perfect health, was driving. We watched a lot of football together because I came to see him and stay with him in September. But it ended up being the best decision of my life. I thought it was random, maybe it was, but I got to spend 3.5 months with my father when he was 85. And there were times, I'm sleeping on an arrow bed, okay, for 3.5 months. And there were times I'm like, is he too old for this? Am I too old for this, right? No, the answer was no. I was very, very fortunate. I learned a lot about my father spending that much time with him. And I did have an opportunity to tell him what I just shared with you, which was, and he was sitting on his chair over here, and I'm on the sofa, the little sofa. And I said, you know, Dad, and we had told each other over the years that we had loved each other. It wasn't any, you know, groundbreaking discussion. But I did say, you know, Dad, I want you to know you were the best father for me. Not just to me, but for me. And I said, you gave me a lot. You gave me confidence in my ability to try anything, knowing that if I failed, that was okay. At least I tried. And he's over there, and he kind of gets a little verklempt, a little bit wispy, and then, well, I don't know what I did. So that was George, right? It was truly a warm and fuzzy father-daughter bonding moment. Well, I don't know what I did. Just a couple things, because I want to show a video of something that I found very, very moving, a 40-second video, and I know we're winding down. A couple things maybe many people did not know about my father was he was a voracious reader, 2 to 3 books, novels a week, after he retired, right? After he retired. In fact, he blew through the whole library when he was staying at Commonwealth Senior Living. And in fact, when John Grisham's book, The Reckoning, came out, he was the first person to Barnes & Noble at 9 a.m. when they opened, because he didn't want to talk to anyone, right? Just wanted to go in, get the book, come back out. And I was blown away because, you know, it's been alluded to, he was an intelligent man, but he read the book in 2 days, and he kept talking about the Bataan Death March in this book. And he was so impressed with the fact that Grisham had done so much painstaking research for this book. I'm pretty well educated. I didn't know what the Bataan Death March was till I asked Dad. couple other things. He was a huge Boston Red Sox fan, which makes no sense. He comes from Pennsylvania. Except that his father, in the coal mining regions, for whatever, there was a streak of the Red Sox. I've lived in New York 22 years. I'm a Yankees fan. I was a Pirates fan until I moved to New York, knew I was going to stay there, and I knew I could not root for the Mets, being a Pirates fan. So I switched to the American League, and I thought when I was staying with him, when both the Yankees and the Red Sox were going to play each other, that we would watch it together, or when the Red Sox started to get that momentum, that we would watch another great father-daughter bonding moment. He doesn't watch the Red Sox games because he believes that if he watches them, they're going to lose. He will, in fact, he would walk out after the first inning, just walk out, and then in the morning I would write a little note saying, Yankees won, or Red Sox won, or he couldn't even, and then he would go watch the game. It would have been taped. So, a complex man. He used to say, I remember growing up, he would say, football is a simple game, but it isn't easy. And I think with Dad, he was a simple man, no question, but there was a lot of levels of complexity about him that belied his blue-collar, hard work ethic, and just call it like you see it, no nonsense. But he was a very complex man and a wonderful, wonderful father, obviously a great football coach, and he had a heart of gold. I want to take this opportunity before we turn to the video to thank Jim Booz and his team for his and their tireless work putting this together. And I was joking with him saying it was a high-class problem because not many schools' basketball team wins the national championship and you have to put together a celebration and then for the team, which was I wish Dad, honestly, I cried the next day after that team won, cried from joy, but I also was upset because Dad was not here to see that, and I knew he would be, I don't even know what the word is to describe how he would feel, but I know that he would be so proud of that team because he knows what it takes to get there, and it's not easy, a national championship in any sport. Carla Williams, for her incredible ability to make decisions that might be complex, very simple, and do it in a lighthearted way, with a smile on her face and a ton of positivity. And then President Jim Ryan. Jim Ryan took the time to call me, text me after he found out that Dad died, and has also emailed me saying he was sorry he could not make it here today because he was traveling on university business. Special guy. A few other quick thanks. UVA doctors Dan Becker, John McKnight, Dad's primary care physicians. He really relied on them, especially after he retired. John McKnight's head nurse, Becky, whom he would call a lot. In fact, I would be in the other room and he'd be talking on the phone and leaving this 3-minute voicemail message. I'm like, what? And I come out and I go, who you're talking to? He goes, oh, I just left a voicemail message. I go, to who? I said, for Becky. I'm like, oh. I go, Becky, you're a saint. So he did become more loquacious, verbose as he got older. Nargis Cross, the executive assistant to President Ryan. Again, Dad would call her all the time, especially in his retirement, to talk or, to talk about football, President's Box, et cetera, et cetera. Suzanne Heft, the executive assistant in the football office, who was incredibly kind and patient to my father, again, in his retirement, when he would come ask her to do certain things or needed, emails printed out from one of us kids. And then, of course, Ethan Saliba. When I heard on the phone, Dad said, oh, I need a certain type of bandage, Ethan's like, come on over, we'll give it to you. Two other things. I heard this a lot from Dad. God meant for me to coach football. And he told me this just before he passed away, too. And just as a quick aside, we watched every bowl game together on January 1st. Nothing was wrong. Dad was in great health. And believe it or not, from September to January 1st, I learned a lot about football, just being in his presence. And I know a lot about football already. You just pick it up by osmosis for, all the 40-some years he coached. But he really was coaching. I don't understand in college football, why they don't run the ball anymore. They don't block. No one has to block in college football anymore. I mean, it's just like, I'm like, Dad, chill. But he did pass away the next day suddenly from a catastrophic stroke and was gone that evening. It was not anything that could have been avoided. It was not anything that nothing could have been changed. It was just his time. And I say that because so many people didn't understand how he passed away so quickly because he was in good health. And the second thing he would say about football, aside for God meant for me to coach, my avocation is my vocation. My vocation was my avocation. I am and was very, very lucky. So I'd like to cue the video. This is 40 seconds of the end of Dad's retirement speech. I've never seen him this emotional, and you all can tell me if you've seen him this emotional.
There is no doubt that I found a home here. To me, it has been a great run, but nothing lasts forever, and now is the time for me to step aside. And in closing, I want everyone to know that I am and will be forever a Wahoo. And I will continue to lend my support to the success of the Virginia football program in the future. It's been a long journey for me from Coaldale, Pennsylvania. And now it's time for this old salt to sail off into the sunset.
Yeah. I wasn't sure I was going to make it through. So Dad, yes, forever a Wahoo, forever loved, and forever missed. So you old salt, I wish you, we all wish you, fair winds and following seas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Adam. And excuse me, we are in fact winding down here. In just a minute, we're going to show one last video of George's career. And when that video is over, people tend to forget George was a naval officer in spite of his seasickness, Bill, Navy class of '56. So after the video is over, there will be a military tribute paid to George as a veteran. And once that is over, the family, which will be up here during the military tribute, will be escorted out. Once they are escorted out, please feel free to follow them. But before we show the video, I'd like to do one thing that's a little bit off script. When my father died 13 years ago, he was the same age George was, 85. And my dad was in the performing arts, music, dance, opera, theater. And the thing he loved most about his job, because George was in the performing arts too, wasn't he? Just in a different way. And the thing my dad loved most was to be in a theater when his performers, George's players, for example, had a great night, a great performance. And the audience would rise to their feet and give them a standing ovation. So I would now like to ask all of you to stand and give George one last standing ovation. Thank you all. I can't think of anyone who deserved that more. And now, one final video, followed by the military tribute. Thank you all.
It's a great deal of pleasure now to introduce to you Virginia's new football coach, George Welsh.
The University of Virginia got itself another football coach today. George Welsh has been a winner.
George was the soundtrack to my college football Saturdays.
When he spoke to us, it was legendary. You hung on every word.
He was an old school coach, but I mean, just melded a lot of guys that I consider brothers now together.
We knew deep down inside how much he meant to us.
He was challenging me to be great.
He had gained our respect immediately, from the biggest player to the smallest player.
He kept you very humble, but he didn't just beat you down not to build you up.
He's one of the all-time best coaches ever.
The successes at UVA as a Cavalier, and then all of the successes that have followed started with this man.
Touchdown, Virginia. And now the Cavaliers celebrate.
They'll want to come back to another bowl, I promise you.
Virginia won the football game! Virginia! I don't believe it!
We're sad that it's over, but happy it happened, and I'm happy that I was a part of it.
There is no doubt that I found a home here. To me, it has been a great run, but nothing lasts forever. And in closing, I want everyone to know that I am and will be forever a Wahoo. It's been a long journey for me from Coaldale, Pennsylvania, and now it's time for this old salt to sail off into the sunset.
Will everyone please stand for the military tribute? thank you all for coming. Safe travels home.